Welcome, everybody, to our continuing series where we talk to philosophers, scholars, professors, media writers, activists, anybody. On the left, on the right, we don't care what your opinion is. We want to have thoughtful conversations and provide it directly to you, the public, so that you have to do this thing that was popular when I was in high school called thinking for yourself. Not as popular these days, but we hope to bring it back, perhaps a small renaissance as possible. With us today is Arend Lijphart.
Lijphart.
Okay, sorry. He's a professor emeritus of political science at the University of California, San Diego, in the Department of Political Science. Lijphart's research focuses on comparative politics, elections, and voting systems, institutions, and ethnicity and politics. His work has had a profound impact on the study of democracy, and he is widely considered the leading authority on consociationalism. That's a new word for me. That is a new word for me. I love learning. Consociationalism. Okay. He is the author or editor of more than a dozen books, including Democracy in Plural Societies and Comparative Exploration, Democracy's Patterns of Majoritarian Consensus Government in 21 countries, Power Sharing in South Africa, Electoral Laws and Their Political Consequences, Parliamentary versus Presidential Government, Electoral Systems and Party Systems, a study of 27 democracies, Patterns of Democracy, Government Forms, and Performance in 36 countries. A lot of studies looking at many different countries around the world and how they deal with democracy. That'll be excellent for today's discussion. Yeah, the professor has received numerous awards throughout his prestigious career in recognition of his groundbreaking research, including the John Skytte Prize in Political Science, Aaron Wiladowski Book Award, honorary doctorates by the University of Leiden, Queen's University Belfast, and the University of Ghent. University of Ghent is a very big university for everybody, if you don't know. He was elected to serve as president of the American Political Science Association itself from 1995 and to 1996. Served as the instructor of political science at Elmira College, assistant professor of political science at UC Berkeley, professor of international relations at the University of Leiden. He worked in the Department of Political Science and International Relations at UC San Diego, and he also did some research in political science at UC San Diego. And finally, he was a research professor emeritus at UC San Diego. He's won the Guggenheim Fellow, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the American Political Science Association, the Royal Netherlands Academy of Arts and Sciences, the John Skytte Prize in Political Science, and elected to the British Academy of Sciences. Wow. Received the Constantine Panunzio Distinguished Emeritus Award. And today we'll be talking to him about a chapter he wrote in this book, Solutions to Political Polarization in America. We already had an interview with Nathaniel Persley. And now we want to talk a little bit more. This was the chapter, Polarization and Democratization, which obviously, going off this background of the books you've written, you are an expert in. So, Professor, let me ask you first, did I get anything wrong with your bio? Is there something we need to correct? Is there something you'd like to state?
No, everything sounded fine.
Okay. So let's go to the meat and potatoes. This book came out in 2015. It's 2023. This was 8 years ago. And you wrote a book on polarization and democratization. So let me ask you, in the year 2015, 8 years ago, did it look like America had a polarization problem? And did it look like it was affecting its democracy? We won't even talk about right now. That's another question. But going back 8 years ago, why write this chapter? Why be part of this book? Why was this a subject worth studying? Was polarization a problem in 2015? Was it an issue worth discussing? What were you seeing, both as an academic and as someone who lives in America with the rest of us? Please.
Yeah, the initiative, of course, to call together a conference on political polarization came from the editor of the book, Nat Persilli.
Yeah.
And so that was not my choice, but I was invited there. And that, as often happens in my career, even if, I may not have had the idea of writing something, but being invited to a conference or a seminar made me think about it. And so that is how that how the chapter that I wrote came about. It was first, of course, just a paper that I presented to the conference at Stanford. So I think at that time there was considerable polarization. That was the time that in the Republican Party, the so-called Tea Party wing was very strong. And so I already judged at that time, and I think my judgment was not far off, that the two parties in the United States had grown far apart. It was often said at that time, in perhaps somewhat superficial journalism, for instance, that the parties have both gone farther to the right on the one hand and farther to the left on the other hand. I think most of the closer observers would say, yes, the Democrats have moved a bit farther to the left, but the distance between the parties has mainly been caused by the Republicans moving very far to the right. And so I think in my paper and in that chapter, I said I compared the two parties in the United States with parties in Europe. And so comparing the conservative parties in Europe with the Republicans in the United States, at that time, I would say the Republicans in the United States had gone much farther to the right than most conservative parties in Europe, whereas the left, the Democrats, have actually been more moderate than, say, European Social Democratic and other left-wing parties. So the problem is mainly of the Republican extremism, but whatever the reason, it was good to look at polarization and what could be done about it. And I guess that was also your question. I think this polarization has become worse as a result of various.
That's the next question.
Yeah.
Has the polarization become worse since 2015 to now, in your personal opinion? You're looking at 2015, going, wow, it's bad. Is it worse now? Is it fair to say it's 8 years later and wow, damn, is it much worse than anything you ever imagined in 2015?
Right.
I mean, did you ever in your mind in 2015 go, yeah, I could see people storming the Capitol in the next couple of years, or were you blown away like the rest of us?
Yeah, no, I would certainly not have expected that. I certainly would have never expected Trump to become president. So those were things that, of course, but the Trump becoming president, and I don't know, perhaps I'm veering off to in a different direction, but that already has to do with the question of how institutions work in the United States. I mean, Trump became president only because of the very strange system of primaries in the Republican Party. And then he was elected president with a minority of the vote. So it had to do with another institutional flaw in the American system, which is the Electoral College, which allowed that kind of thing to happen. But
just like W. Bush, Trump was the second one. He wasn't the first.
Bush was right.
Second time where we've had a president who was not elected by the American people.
I know.
And if we're going to go into it, Bush was worse. He had his cousin call the election, and then he had his dad call his old buddy Jim Baker to help the Supreme Court rig it. I mean, we've done this twice. We've had crappy, unsubstantiated elections that are just a joke on the world scene. Trump was part two. Sorry.
Exactly. So the one thing that I would still say about the 2000 election is that I wish that Gore had not said, okay,
thank you.
The Supreme Court has chosen, I accept it, I think we should not have accepted that. We should have said, let's go out, demonstrate in the streets, because I think this was about the worst decision that the Supreme Court has made, and even at that time, I did not expect that would happen. With the current Supreme Court, I would not have been surprised at all, of course, because the Supreme Court has no.
Yeah, but let's remember
right.
that. Fair enough. I understand the new Supreme Court is very extreme. It's more conservative than we've seen a Supreme Court, I think, in 50 years, going back to the 70s. But I also want to point out that the moderate Supreme Court, before it became extreme under Trump, the one under Obama, still said that in the state of Arizona, if you see someone who looks like a Mexican, it's okay as a police officer to pull them out of their car because they look like a Mexican. That's what the Supreme Court said during Obama. So let's remember, they weren't exactly super liberal and progressive at everything. That was also the Supreme Court that backed up Citizens United under Obama and said that corporations could have unlimited influence. So I'm just saying, people are going, well, the court's so extreme now. And I go, yeah, but weren't these two horrible decisions they did when they were moderates? I mean, a little bit.
Yeah, that is certainly true. I would also, what I'm just thinking of is that Americans tend to forget this kind of thing too easily. I mean, obviously you're not forgetting it because you're just mentioning it, but remember that the swing voter in the 2000 decision, Bush v. Gore, that was, I forgot the name of the woman who was a justice on the Supreme Court, and she was a Republican, of course. She voted with the majority, which was 5-4, and then, of course, she continued on the Supreme Court. When she retired, she just got universal praise for her work on the Supreme Court. And I said, well, perhaps for many things, perhaps she deserved it, but I would not give her high grades for her overall performance because she caused Bush to be elected president, and so she indirectly also responsible for the Vietnam War and so on. Should we forget all those things by heaping praise on her? I am not ready to do that.
Thank you. A lot of Americans do not remember our awkward pieces from the past. And I mean, just the last couple of years. They're just like, oh, what? I can't tell you the number of people who said, Trump is the worst. We've never faced anything like him. And I go, what about the 2000 election where he had his cousin call the election and then he had his daddy call in a favor to get him be president? And people are like, what? That happened? Yeah. I mean, I get 95% of everybody I met, and I'm not a Trump fan at all, but 95% of the people that I've met who don't like Trump have no clue about W. Bush or what he did or how bad it was or the Iraq. They're like, what? Really? That happened? I'm like, this isn't that old. This is not Vietnam. This is only a few years ago. Let me ask you a question, if I may, Professor. Why, in your opinion, why did the Republican Party become so extreme in 2015? And why did they become even more extreme? If we're saying, okay, the left went a little bit extreme, but really the parties are super divergent and we have polarization. I think that's what you're saying, is that the parties are ideologically divergent. Yeah. They have moved away. We do have more polarization. It's mostly because the Republicans moved so far. But hey, the left did a little bit too. Why did the right move so far in 2015? And why did they even move further than that? And up to, why are they making these gigantic leaps every couple of years further to the right? What is going on?
Yeah, I think a lot of that just has to do with the Trump presidency and I guess the whole Trump phenomenon. And that again, why did it all happen? Why did he win the primaries? Why did he was he elected? Has to do with flaws in the American political system. And the first one, of course, was that if you look at the series of primary elections, the presidential primary elections in the Republican Party. In the beginning, there certainly was not that overwhelming support for Trump. So if they had used a more sensible system for declaring the winner in the different primaries, instead of just saying, oh, whoever gets the most votes is the winner. If they would have chosen the ranked choice vote, then I think somebody else would have been the nominee, and not Trump. But once he became the nominee, he was a very I guess a successful candidate, playing on people's emotions, and so somehow he managed to convert the Republican Party to a Trumpist party. He's still not the choice of everybody, but I think the majority are behind him. And I think he also saw correctly that the electorate, or certainly the Republican voters, by and large, did not care for or did not mind all of his personal transgressions. In the same way, I think that the Democrats did not mind Clinton's personal transgressions.
Sure.
And that is something that Clinton did not sufficiently realize. I mean, when he got into trouble because of the Monica Lewinsky affair, he should have just said, "It's a personal thing. Pete, the voters don't care about it, and that's it." I think he would not have been impeached.
Okay, I don't want to relitigate Clinton. Let me, if I can, politely, I want to push back a little bit.
Okay.
Trump is bad. I got it. But you just said, a bunch of professors said, wow, polarization is extreme in 2015 before anybody was ever thinking of Trump. So there has to be some reason that and you said also the Republican Party had moved further to the right by 2015. So we can't say that Trump's the cause of everything if there was extremism before Trump. Why was there extremism before Trump? What was the cause? Secondly, Trump would not have been as bad if there never was a Tea Party movement. If the Republican Party was not moving continuously to the right and hadn't further moved so far to the right, and then Trump came. I mean, like if Trump tried to mask himself onto the Republican Party, let's say of the 1990s, I don't know if it would have worked. There was already so much extremism. There was already so much polarization, and then he was able to land on top of it. So what was the cause of the polarization before he ever showed up?
I think a lot has to do with, of course, that doesn't explain everything, but let me just say what I was about to say. It has a lot to do with the system of primary elections in the United States, which gives extremes a big voice in the outcome, and it is generally the more conservative, in the Republican Party in any case, the more conservative voters who have the biggest influence. Of course, primaries are not anything new. I mean, they have existed, or they have become almost universal in American politics since at least the 1950s and 60s. So it doesn't explain why suddenly in the next century it became such a glaring extremism. But I think that does have a lot to do with it. And I was just recently asked a question about that is a very new development, of course, the social media. Why have they become such a source of disinformation and confusion? I think there too the idea was, like in primaries, give the people more of a choice. In fact, it is the more extreme voices that determine what the social media mainly have to tell. So I think there is a certain parallel there. But that is not your question. And basically, I do not understand why the explanation that I gave, why it became so important from, let's say, the late 20th century on and into the 21st century. I don't have a good explanation for that.
I mean, that's the question. Is like you said, primaries are not new. So if primaries were the reason, why didn't we see extremist politicians in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s? We're seeing it more recently. And if it's this or that, I'm looking for a cause, because we can't blame it all on Trump. Like you said, the Tea Party was extreme. I've been doing a lot of research on political polarization. There was a ton of academic studies that came out during the Obama presidency.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of academics. This conference by Professor Nate Persley, there was, you and many other academics came together during the Obama administration. Nobody was even thinking about Trump. And everybody was saying, wow, the polarization is so bad. And then it got way worse. I mean, the concept of people were worried about the polarization in America and had not even thought of Trump. That's an incredibly powerful statement. If I say that to other people, they're like, wow, because they think it's all Trump. And I go, I'm sorry, there was a lot of academics in America who were noticing something was really wrong before anybody ever thought of Trump. This book, your participation in it, is proof of that fact. And we go, okay, well, why did we have the Tea Party? Well, because of the primaries. Well, we've had the primaries for decades. So what was new? What changed? Why did we suddenly get to this? And the thing I'm wondering is, other people have also said, yes, it's social media. Social media is making it happen. But social media really got going around 2015.
Oh, yeah. It's a recent phenomenon.
So we've had polarization before there. So we need something that goes back before social media, before the Tea Party, before Trump, and changed in order to explain something that's pushing things in this way. I'm just trying to find that thing.
Well, one of the explanations that I could come across is that I don't know whether that's really universal, but in the United States, apparently a lot has to do with the growing inequality, and especially the inequality between relatively poor people in rural areas and then the more well-to-do or relatively well-to-do city dwellers. So there has become a kind of the rural-urban difference has become great, and I am not sure. Certainly, I had it's not an explanation that I've come up with, but it does seem to be plausible.
I like that. That makes sense. Yeah, because I've noticed that you have a greater rural-urban difference. There's more extremes. I've even noticed that where I'm living here in the Central Valley. That would make sense. So I want to ask you a question, but first I just want to point out, just to back this up, I remember when the Tea Party came out, and their first big event was with Glenn Beck, and it was in, I think, Washington, D.C. on Martin Luther King's birthday. And the whole crowd was full of strictly white people who were saying things that a lot of minorities were not comfortable with. And I remember getting into an argument with some of my friends, and they're going, and I'm like, that's kind of racist. There's a bunch of people who don't talk well about MLK, and they say things that are kind of quasi-racist, and then they're going to have a rally on MLK's birthday in Washington, D.C. What do you think that's going to do but piss off a bunch of minorities? And Trump wasn't around. That was something they thought of on their own. I also remember that same time you had the Miss America pageant. And this was when Obama was president. There was a girl, and her parents came from Lebanon. She grew up here. Very beautiful woman. She won the Miss America pageant. America exploded on social media saying, why is this raghead here, and get her the hell out of America. She's not a real American. The blowback was so bad, NBC, CBS News had to cover the amount of vitriol and hate to Miss America. Fast forward 2 more years, while Obama's still president, a girl whose parents were from India becomes Miss America. Exact same thing happens. The news has to report how there's so much vitriol and hate, and people think, who the hell is this Muslim? She's not an American. Both these girls are Americans.
Mm-hmm.
Trump did not make all of America freak out that brown-skinned girls were Americans. Trump did not make the Tea Party decide to have a quasi-racist message and then go piss off black people by going to MLK's birthday in Washington, D.C., where he gave a same famous speech. They did all that before him. So I'm always curious when they go, well, it was Trump. Okay, but wasn't there racism in America before? Didn't that thing never go away? This is during Obama's presidency, right? We're post-racial America. We have two Miss Americas who don't look white, and the country rejects them. So much so the news has to cover it. But here's the question I have for you. Okay, Republicans went further to the right. Democrats went a little bit to the left. Republicans went further to the right. Joe Biden is a Democrat. He goes on television with a blood red backdrop, not typical for American presidential speeches, 2 active duty Marines, not typical for American speeches, and then seems to say that 78 million Americans are enemies of the state. It terrifies everyone in the Republican Party, and it actually terrifies fellow Democrats and independents who say, damn, that's not good. We've never had a president give a speech where he seemed to call out 78 million Americans as enemies of the state. We've never had a president give a speech with a blood red backdrop at night with active duty Marines in the background while seeming to point out that half the country isn't the US of A. Is that an example of bringing the country together or the same level of polarization that the Republicans have been exhibiting, in your opinion?
I don't remember that incident, but certainly I would, at the very least, call it a big misstep on the part of Biden if he said that, and if he organized that kind of display. That I think it is not usual for him. Because he tends to be more of a compromiser, and in fact, I think if he has any flaw, it's to be too confident of his ability to bring about a compromise, which means that he does not understand how polarized we have become.
It did happen. There's the picture of him, blood red backdrop, 2 active duty Marines, massive backlash, basically scared 78 million Americans into thinking that the government was coming for them. So when an elected leader has a speech at night with a blood red backdrop and military standing behind him saying, wow, he's going to get tough with part of Americans, it typically terrifies that group of Americans that were targeted. You've studied other countries. When a leader comes on TV and says this section's a problem for our whole nation, usually good things don't come from that. I remember there was a guy called Hitler who did that. So Biden did this speech. It definitely blew up in his face. Independents definitely said that was way too far. No president had said anything like this ever. No president had said, look, there's millions of voters and I view them as the bad guys. A little bit of blame is okay for Biden. Maybe we can't just say it's all the Republicans going too extreme, because this is kind of extreme, right? I mean, this isn't a good sign, is it?
Yeah, that's I guess what he could have done, and I just don't remember much about this, is that he should have made a clear difference between MAGA Republicans and then other Republicans. But if in fact all of the voters who voted for Trump would be in that MAGA Republicans camp, then I think that he did go too far. I think why did so many voters who may not have been all that excited about Trump still voted for him as president is that one other thing that has become kind of firmly established in the United States is the party loyalties, and this was different in the, when I went to college and graduate school in the 1950s and 1960s, the way American politics or the American parties were described as being flexible, and voters being flexible, sometimes going one way, sometimes going another way. But that has become, there are very few Republican voters or voters generally, who switch between Democrats and Republicans. So I think Trump simply got a lot of votes, not because he was Trump, but because he was the Republican nominee. And so people stayed loyal to their party.
So you would agree the rural-urban difference has become great. The parties have become more loyal opposition. I'm sorry. The parties have become more divergent. There's a more split between the rural-urban areas, and the parties used to be flexible, but now they're not. They're kind of rigid now. Is that fair? We used to have flexible parties.
I think that's fair. You mentioned one other thing that is important, is this question of the uneasiness of many Americans with the United States becoming more diverse. As you said, some a Lebanese woman winning Miss America, an Indian woman, and generally, of course, it is true. There are more people in the United States now who were born abroad, and especially born in South Asia, Southeast Asia, East Asia, and Middle East. There have been a flood of refugees and asylum seekers. All of that has become more extreme. I'm just as a matter of fact. I don't, and then it's easy to blame some other group, and I guess the Republicans blame the Democrats for causing this. And of course, it is not. It's a worldwide phenomenon. I mean, the Europeans deal with this kind of thing too. In fact, there was an early attempt, because they needed workers, to get Turkish people from Turkey, people from Morocco, and then it turned out they were temporary workers, but in fact, many of them, perhaps even most of them, tended to stay, and they encouraged other people, their large families, to then try to come to Europe. So I was born and grew up in the Netherlands. In the Netherlands of the 1950s, it was a white country. Even though there had already been immigration, of course, from Indonesia, and then later on from Suriname and the Netherlands and Antilles. So there were more dark-skinned people around, but still, on the whole, the country was a white country, and that has just changed, especially in the larger cities. And there is quite a bit unhappiness about. Even I've heard an old friend who stayed with my family during the last part of the Second World War, because he was a so-called, they called them the hunger children, because there was not enough food in the big cities. They were sent to more rural areas, and I kept in touch with him. The last time I saw him, I was just surprised, and not happily surprised, how right-wing extremist he had become, in saying, hey, I have a feeling this is not my country anymore. That kind of thing one can hear kind of MAGA Republicans say too.
Yeah. And it's funny, I just was talking to somebody about this, but if you want to see that, watch the movie Farmingville. Movie Farmingville came out a little while. It's about 100 Mexicans show up in a small town in upstate New York. Mm-hmm. And the people lose their minds. They can't handle it. It's a population of a couple thousand. Just 100 Mexicans show up, and they're just like, "Whoa, what's going on?" They freak out and lose it. Watch Farmingville. That was filmed here in America. People say, "Oh, we're going to be all integrated." And I go, "Why don't you watch that movie first and tell me how well Middle America treats Mexicans who just came from Latin America? It's not always great." Let me ask you another question. You remember January 6th? January 6th? Yeah. Okay. So I consider that a coup. From what I've studied from European scholars, they consider it a coup too. Not very good. I don't support it. I think it was a bad event. But something happened that day that I wanted to tell you and ask your opinion. I'm here in California, and California is very liberal. I have some liberal friends in San Diego, and I had some liberal friends in Los Angeles. They don't know each other. Liberals in San Diego, liberals in LA don't know each other. January 6th happens. I'm freaking out. I'm calling everybody, family, friends, etc. What's going on? Two of these people say, "You know what? They should have stood 300 of those people who entered the Capitol building in row and shot them down live on television in order to establish authority," and go, "Wow, that's extreme." Then I call another liberal friend, and they say the same thing. Those people don't know each other. They don't talk. And I'm sure you've heard the cockroach theory. You see one, there's a lot in the walls. There's not just one. So liberals saying, "Hey, January 6th happened. It's bad. But let's take a couple hundred Americans, line them up, and execute them live on television." Is that a sign of calming down and coming together, or massive polarization from the left?
I would think if it is widespread, then it is polarization from the left. Now you mentioned two sets of friends, and I don't know how representative they are. My own reaction when I first kind of watched what was going on, I thought it wasn't all that serious, more like a riot than a coup. But it became clear, of course, that it was going that they were out to try to capture and kill the vice president and so on. So it was a coup. If it was a real coup to bring about a change in government, I think the coup was not very well organized. I mean, they could, if they really wanted a coup, they should have gone in with firearms, and then the situation would have been different. And I still don't think it would have been successful. I just don't see how that could have been successful. But basically, they went in just kind of relying on the having large amounts of people and using rather primitive weapons like sticks and so on. So what one would expect in the United States is certainly guns. I mean, this country is gun crazy, and so why didn't these gun crazed people not carry guns into their insurrection?
Because it's a secure ground, and they would have been stopped before they ever got there.
Pardon me?
So if you go to DC, it's a secure ground. Before you even get there, as you even drive and approach, there's cops, guards everywhere. You're walking around with a piece, they're going to stop you. So you'd have to have it concealed. And I think a lot of people were concerned about being shot. I mean, you pull out a gun, you can get shot on site right there. That'd be part of it. The other reason is I don't know if they told everybody it was a coup. We're doing a coup. It just kind of like seemed like it was spur of the moment. Like you said, it was not very well planned. I don't want to get into it. What concerns me, though, is evidence that there were politicians involved and that there is video of police officers letting some of the rioters in peacefully. We're not allowed to hear about that. So for whatever reason, the investigations won't go into politicians and they won't go into police officers who provided it. I do know that when you look at coups and when you're able to get the military and security apparatus and political elites participating in, it does take on a higher level of authority and seriousness. In America, we've basically decided to not even talk about if there was a political organizational aspect and if there was a law enforcement organizational aspect. We focused strictly on the rioters and we said, got them. And I'm going, no, you didn't. If there was law enforcement, that's a fifth column. If there was politicians, that's a fifth column. Those things still intact lead to collapsed societies when you look at it around the world. We can't even have that discussion in America. That's neither here nor there. Let me ask you another question. Does it get better in America? You've traveled, you've seen other countries. You're from another country, but you're an American. You've been here for a while. You've been around. Do you see political polarization in America, getting better on its own? Maybe people just calm down in the future and they, just start coming back together. Or is there no real reason to believe that? I mean, do you see where things get better naturally on their own, or do you not see any signs of that?
I don't see any favorable trend in that respect. Some institutional changes would help that. I think if we had elections, for instance, by proportional representation, I think the major parties would separate themselves into separate parties. I think there would be a more extreme Democratic party and a more moderate Democratic party. There would be, at this point, a Trumpist Republican Party and a more moderate Republican Party. And so that way you could have the two moderate wings being responsible for policy together. But the system of elections that we have, the plurality elections, forces basically the parties into the two-party system is so well established that especially in the Republican Party, there's one faction, even if it's a majority faction, controls the whole Republican Party.
I've heard that. So this conversation keeps coming up, but for the viewers, there are two types of democracy. Well, there's many types, but roughly, you could call it what's called a winner-take-all style of democracy is what we have in America, where there's two candidates, one group wins. Even if they get like 51% of the vote, they can say, well, I won, and you 49% have to do what I say. In Europe and in the countries that America established democracies in, they don't use the American system at all. They view it as madness. They have what they call a multi-party system coalition government, where you have a couple of different parties, and a couple of them will have to agree to come together so that you can get something above 65, 75% of the vote. So you have this coalition government. They're able to pass laws because they have enough votes to just get things passed all the way through. It's like Clinton on his first term, 65%. We don't do that. We go, hey, I got 51% of the vote. The 49% of you who don't like what I said, you can go screw yourself. Tough. And they think that that's reckless and insane in Europe and Japan and most of the rest of the world, who does not have our system and follows a multi-party system coalition government. Even our allies in France, Germany, and England don't do it. And yet we still do it here. And maybe that's partly why we have so much polarization. There's no reason for anybody to have to come to an agreement. Hey, I won. My side won. I get everything I want. I don't need you. Versus, I can't do anything unless I make a friend.
Yep.
Right? Multi-party systems, you can't do anything unless you're going to go I don't care if you won the election and you're the biggest party. If you're not willing to go make a buddy with another party, you're not going to be running the government.
Right. Well, I think the one thing that I've argued in, I have a book called Patterns of Democracy, where I make exactly that kind of distinction between what I call majoritarian democracies and consensus democracies. And the United States belongs on the majoritarian side, partly because of the presidential system, which of course is also winner take all, and then the plurality system of elections. The United States is not the only one. I mean, Britain is basically a majoritarian country. So is Canada. So is Australia. But most European countries are more coalition oriented, and I think people often criticize coalitions because that means they have to put some water in the wine. They cannot all of their so they have to make compromise, which means giving up some of their points in order to have an agreement with other parties. But on the whole, I think the coalition type of democracy just works better and that is what especially in the second edition of my Patterns of Democracy, I have just abundant data showing that consensus democracies work better than majoritarian democracies on a whole lot of effectiveness of government measures, on quality of democracy measures, and so on. So it was, I already had this basic hypothesis was already in my first edition, which was published in 1999. But when I worked on the second edition, published in 2012, there was so much better information available that the picture is just absolutely clear. And it is clearer than I ever expected to find. So it was a pleasant surprise that my hypothesis turned out to be on the whole quite correct, even though I was not expecting that kind of a clear picture. So I think that also has policy consequences. I mean, if one type of democracy is better than another type of democracy, the worst type of democracy should pay heed to what works better. And I've recently been in touch with a Swiss political scientist, James Briding, who is doing a research project on what he calls the S8 nations. It's kind of like the G7. Okay. Both are the big countries, and the S8 are smaller countries. And they're like Sweden, the Netherlands, Switzerland, Singapore, and so on. And they said on the whole, these countries work very well. And so they have lessons to teach to the larger democracies. And why don't the larger democracies learn more from these smaller places? And when you ask me that question of why don't larger democracies learn more, one of my observations living in the United States, and I've also done work in India where I've spent quite a bit of time, large countries tend to be very inward looking. So there's a lot happening inside the country. So it's not all that strange that large countries like the United States, India even more, tend to be inward looking. But that means they're not paying much attention to what goes on in other countries.
Mm. Well, this has been fascinating. You've been exceptionally formative, and you've been very cool answering all the questions. We're winding down. Let me ask you two questions. Is there anything you wanted to cover? Any questions you had for us? Is there something you wanted to make more clear, or something you wanted to discuss?
No, I think I'm happy with it. Of course, I might just want to emphasize that my major focus, and actually also my major finding in political science, is that when you talk about something like polarization, you're talking about attitudes and opinions. It's very difficult to change attitudes and opinions. What is easier to do is but not easy at all, is to change institutions. So I think that should be our emphasis, and that's why I'm also saying we should learn. More countries should learn the lesson that this combination of parliamentary government and proportional representation is the main clue to working better. And unfortunately, of course, the United States is deviant on both respects. They don't have parliamentary government, we have presidential government. We don't have proportional representation, we have the ancient plurality system. So there's a lot that needs to be changed in the United States. And while I'm generally an optimist, I cannot be optimistic about the chances that the U.S. will, step in even into the direction of this better type of system.
Okay, well, we're going to leave it there. Thank you, Professor, for coming out. Really appreciate it. We've been talking with Arend Lijphart, UC San Diego, Department of Political Science, Professor Emeritus. Professor, thank you so much for being with us. I'm going to email you a copy of this interview in a few hours. Is there anyone else that you know who might be willing to be part of an honest conversation? I hope you felt that we were just trying to have an honest conversation here. We didn't put any words in your mouth. We didn't do any gotcha journalism. Do you know anybody who might be willing to also talk with us to keep the conversation going about the state of America today?
Yeah, perhaps you should be in touch with this James Briding.
Okay.
He is, and I'm actually not completely sure whether he is. He is located in Switzerland, and Briding could be a Swiss name. I'm not sure that he may actually be an American. But in any case, if you like, I can send you his email address.
Oh, I appreciate that, Professor. I'll email you a copy of this video very soon. I would love any contacts you have.
Yeah, because I'm sure it'll need a lot of cleaning up because when we talk, there are incomplete sentences and so on. But that's your responsibility.
It's my responsibility, and I love it. Thank you for being with us, Professor. Thank you so much. I will bid you adieu now, and I will send you a copy of this video soon. And I want to thank you for your time and for your patience and your flexibility and willing to answer all the questions where we went.
Excellent. Thank you.
We'll see you. Thank you, Professor.